Welcome back. In this session, we'll talk about if you're going to design an online course, do you want to design to focus on delivering content or establishing a networked community? So, by way of introduction, there's a great quote by Marshall McLuhan, first we build the tools, then they build us. So, you and I have been a product of a face-to-face, primitive technology environment. But think of our students who'll be growing up with ubiquitous technology and free online courses. They will be built differently as learners than we are. And I'd like to acknowledge up front Maggie Sokolik, who is a kind of a MOOC expert. She's written a book, How to Be a Successful MOOC Student. But I got to know her work through, I was a pre-publication reviewer of the Language MOOCs book. She wrote a key introductory chapter from which I took some of the information for this talk. So, prototypes. The xMOOC is focused on content delivery. In contrast to that, the cMOOC is a connectivist MOOC, and we'll talk more about what that means. And there are others, for example, an LMOOC for language learning. There are several others, but these are the ones we can look at today. So you know what an xMOOC is, but let's look at what a cMOOC is. Connectivist, collaborative, creative. The first one was done in 2007 at Utah State. It was a grad course in open education taught by David Wiley with 50 students from 8 countries. And it was followed a year later at the University of Manitoba. Stephen Downes and George Siemens taught a course, Connectivism and Expected Knowledge, in which they had 25 paying participants and well over 2,000 free students. The term MOOC was coined by Dave Cormier, and here's Stephen Downes and George Siemens. So let's look at George Siemens' connectivist model. It's not a theory of learning, really, but it still is illustrative. So he basically says knowledge doesn't come from one source, from school, from one curriculum, even from one cultural thread. So school, of course, is part of a formal knowledge system, and then there are informal systems of libraries, museums, that sort of thing. But lots of people do self-learning about a hobby or something like that, and they often learn in learning communities, which might be their friends, neighbors, an online learning community. Those are playing a larger and larger part. Kids now get experience through games and simulations that are different from these other places, and they may be lucky enough to have a mentor or to serve as an apprentice. So the idea of this model is that these elements all connect in unpredictable ways to create the knowledge that we treasure in ourselves, and even more so, it's a model that will become more important in the future. Let's look at the big picture of MOOCs. So here's the Stanford MOOC, the xMOOC, which started in 2011. The first cMOOC was back in the 2007-2008 arena. But this construction really says, well, wait a minute. We started with open source software, open content. The two together made open educational resources, abbreviated OER. And through that, we wound up with organizations like the Open University, the gigantic British university enrolling 250,000 students, and MIT's OpenCourseWare, where in the year 2000, they made all of their course resources and materials available online. You couldn't take a course. So this says that, oh gee, the Stanford folks got their inspiration from connectivist MOOCs. And then the xMOOC then became Udacity, Coursera, Inspired FutureLearn in the Open University, and edX at MIT. It's a good story, but they're missing an important element. Notice the big red dot. What started in 2006? that really played a key role in the development of the xMOOC and what's different about the xMOOC. And that's Khan Academy. So the video model from the Khan Academy was adopted whole cloth by the Stanford MOOC. And essentially all of the xMOOCs use that short 10-minute or less model for conveying content. Isn't it ironic that the MOOCs, which have had an impact mostly at higher ed, got their start from an idea in K-12 that is still a strong idea? So let's see what George Siemens, biased of course, says about cMOOCs versus xMOOCs. He actually coined the term xMOOC in 2012. But he says that cMOOCs emphasize creation, creativity, and autonomy using social networks. A cMOOC, in his view, would use a variety of social networks uncontrolled by any institution, as opposed to an xMOOC, which he says models a traditional environment of known content delivered through short videos and quizzes. So the xMOOC model would use one learning management system typically to deliver the whole course, whereas the cMOOC model is very much a distributed model, not centrally controlled. He puts it another way, his bias, of course, that cMOOCs focus on knowledge creation and generation, whereas xMOOCs only focus on knowledge duplication. I would change that term to knowledge delivery. And that's what's appropriate in, let's say, K-12 and bachelor's degree. So looked at graphically, it becomes clear. An xMOOC has a course, a content management system, and an instructor at the core, and then all of the students connect directly to that. This is Stephen Downs' view up here, and he said, well, that's fine for small groups, but it doesn't scale up. Now, he said this a little bit before the gigantic MOOCs, but what he means is the instructor can no longer interact with each student. Whereas this model of students interacting with each other without the necessity of a core center to make it all work, he thinks that does scale up. Now, a number of professors and K-12 instructors have tried to create online language systems. Duolingo is a wonderful example, and it's doing very well. But in a MOOC environment, these language instructors found it didn't work because a language is more than content. Yes, you have to know nouns and verbs and dialect, but you learn those best through dialogue, through rich interaction. So Maggie Skokolik says that she has 6 recommendations for someone creating a language MOOC. First is that you want to maximize engagement and interaction however you can. Second is that you're not managing self-organized learning, but however you can facilitate that, that will help your learners. You need a real instructor presence. Video, but a rich video for engagement. You have to define what do we mean by success so students know that they're not just dialoguing, but they know what their target is. And finally, the forms of assessment that you use have to match the learning goals. So for example, in a language course, you would actually have to listen to a student speaking to assess their language learning. You couldn't just see what they have on a multiple choice test. So in conclusion, let's just kind of review what MOOCs do in their different formats. So the xMOOC is good for delivering a curriculum, and that's a connection of the learner to the content. That's great for high school and for bachelor's. But a cMOOC, with its connectivist, collaborative, creative aspect, is good at building shared knowledge, and that emphasizes learner to learner. Now, something like an LMOOC, where you want some combination, has a defined curriculum to deliver, but through lots of learner to learner and learner to teacher interactions. And the key idea here is that you need to match the model of your online course to the learning task, whether you're delivering content, fostering a network of community, or some combination of the two.